Thank you everyone for joining us back. I hope you have enjoyed this short gap and must be now refreshed. I'm too. So let's continue our learning. We have pasted a link of Padlet in the chat box to a review of the program. Thank you. I would request all the participants to kindly go through the Padlet link. Normally, we see that in most of the conferences and summits, special concentration is on the language, teaching, or pedagogies, where we have kept a session related to mathematics. There are also other subject specialist session too in the following 2 days. So today we have a session on maths mastery, the Singaporean way. The topic seems very interesting, and so is the speaker, Ms. Shazia Hussain. Ever since I have known her explaining the concept of her session, I'm too fan of her. Shazia, let me give you a review of her brief profile. Ms. Shazia Hussain is a director and a founder of Advait, a company that provides leadership coaching and innovating solutions in education. She has competency and aptitude to engage and interact in a manner that acknowledge everyone's passion, drive, and desire and want to engage and grow. She's currently pursuing her doctorate in education and leadership at Brunel University, London, UK. Over to you, Ms. Shazia.
Thank you very much, Naina, for your wonderful introduction. I hope I'm going to be able to live up to the expectations now of the introduction. You've already given my introduction. So yes, as you mentioned, today's session is looking at mastery, maths mastery. Congratulations to the entire team for putting this program together. If I is playing up a little bit, so it might disappear and pop back on again, but we'll see. So as I was saying, can you see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Let me try again. So as I was thanking everybody, my Zoom suddenly decided to play up with me. Right, okay, so thank you to the entire team for putting together a phenomenal 3-day program to support educators globally on their journey. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I know I have 30 minutes, which now leaves me with about 31 minutes to start. The session today that I'm going to take you through is looking at maths mastery, the Singapore way. I know I won't be able to do justice in the short span of time I have, but I'm hoping that by the end of the session, you will have some idea in terms of comparing how traditional maths is perhaps taught where you are in comparison to how the Singaporeans teach it. And you'll sort of meet Dr. Banhar in a couple of videos, and he always says, it's not Singapore's way, it's just a good way of teaching mathematics. So we're going to continue into the presentation. So what are the key principles? The 5 key principles of teaching in the Singaporean way. There are some learning theories that we're going to touch base on and what they are, what the CPA approach is. I'm not going to be able to touch too much on the bar model, but bar modeling is a huge part of the component, lesson structure, and forms of assessment. So I'm going to start off with a question, and I'm going to ask, what is mastery? And what is your understanding of mastery? As much as I'd like it to be interactive, I understand that with a number of people on board, normally when I'd be doing a training session, that's what I would say, right? Tell me, what is mastery? What is your understanding of mastery? And teachers would give their view what it is. So mastery, if you think about mastery, it should be that everybody can learn. And aptitude is the length of time it takes for a person to learn and not how bright a person is. And it's about giving those learners the right circumstances. As Benjamin Bloom says, every learner can learn. And it's having high expectations for all, no matter where they are in their journey of learning. The teachers need to have an expectation that all pupils will achieve, and that differentiation is through variation, which is scaffolding learning and not putting a ceiling on students' learning. And that is really important. Mastery is also the depth of understanding that a pupil has, and not just a superficial understanding. So it's focusing on the why and not just the how, and not just teaching mechanical rote or a rule or a method kind of learning, as Richard Skemp says, but a relational learning, a more meaningful learning in which the pupil is able to understand and make connections and is able to be fluent and has that mindset of fluency over connectivity. And a good example is fractions, decimals, and percentages. If a student can only solve mathematical problems in their little box, which is decimals only, fractions only, percentages only, and cannot make those connections, then you cannot say they have mastered that concept. And if they only learn rules and a method, that is superficial learning. And at some point in their mathematical journey, which is usually at a later stage, mostly secondary, students fail. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is the importance of primary teachers in particular to really focus on conceptual understanding as opposed to just instrumental and instructional teaching, which is often the case that is happening. So the Singapore approach to teaching looks at 4 key elements: pedagogical principles based on the work of educational thinkers, and that those pedagogical principles are what is referred to as the mastery approach. The way the lesson is delivered in the classroom, and there is a pedagogy in the way it is delivered, that methodology has been designed for a specific reason to get a specific result. The number of tools that are used, and that's where concepts and tools like bar models come in, and CPA and part-whole models and TENS frames would come in. And they are tools that enable the student to develop that depth of understanding and any other set of resources that may support the teacher and the learner to progress through the curriculum. And sometimes those resources can be textbooks, because those textbooks become a structure to teaching and learning. So the basic explained behind the approach to Singapore maths are underpinned through theory. And the theory, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Banha, who is a mathematical expert in Singapore, and he will talk you through some of the principles there.
Singapore approach is basically based on 5 basic learning theories. The first one is Piaget, which basically talks about letting students have ample processing time to accommodate new idea. And that's why in Singapore textbooks you see an anchor task, a single task that is dealt with for a rather long time. The second learning theory is by Zoltan Dienst that advocate the learning of ideas in an informal way first, through exploration, before structured learning. There's also an emphasis on cooperative learning or collaborative structures during learning, and that's Vygotsky. And there's a lot of emphasis on relational understanding, not just instrumental understanding, and that's really Richard Skemp. And finally, the CPA approach, the use of concrete experiences to move them to the abstract learning, that's really based on Jerome Bruner. So the Singapore approach is really based on a set of basic learning theories, all the way from Piaget, all through Skemp.
So there you saw an overview of the 5 learning theories by Jean Piaget, Zoltan Dienst, Vygotsky, Skemp, and Bruner. So the Singapore approach is a proven method and is underpinned by research. The 5 key learning theories, underpinned through research, have led Singaporean mathematics to develop the following activities. So an anchor task. The anchor task is part of a lesson, which I will talk on quickly when we come later on the lesson structure. And that anchor task is enabling students to have ample processing time. So rather than telling them how to learn, giving them a problem at the start of the lesson, to enable them to think and process their thinking, enables you then to teach better. Exploration, so giving students time to explore before putting the structure in. The structure is important, but Zoltan Dien's does emphasize on the importance of enabling students to develop an understanding through exploration, whether it's independent or whether it's through group work, which nicely leads on to the next one, cooperative learning, very important. How often in our classrooms, especially in primary maths, are we giving students time to engage, to discuss, to cooperate? And that's a fundamental learning experience as explained by Vygotsky. Then when we talked about the relational versus instrumental, students need to understand the concept of what they're learning and not just be given procedures. And Richard Skemp emphasizes the importance of conceptual understanding and how that develops mastery. And finally, the CPA approach, which is the concrete, pictorial, abstract. Until they don't have that, they will not really master their understanding. And that is again underpinned by the research done by Jerome Bruner. So why are all of these skills important? Well, we need to develop the core competencies of our students. So when they do get to secondary and they do get to high school and they do get into university, they develop problem solving skills. They develop as critical thinkers. Now, if you look at this table, which isn't brilliantly bright and clear, but in the past, many, many years ago, it was expected that people went into industry for routine manual work. If you look at the red bar here, you can see that was a requirement, and therefore those particular skills of critical thinking and problem solving were not a necessity. But we now know that it's non-routine and and it's actually cognitive and analytical work that is required in industry. Therefore, our students from a very young age need to be exposed to that kind of thinking so that they can develop that early on and continue to develop their critical thinking, problem solving, analytical skills as they progress through school. We all know the future forward, Industry 4.0 is digital. So it's more fundamental now than it ever has been before. And this research by the Education Endowment Fund will also state that the more opportunities we give students to work in groups, to cooperate, to discuss, to problem solve, the more fundamental that their understanding will, more fundamentally their understanding will develop, and they will develop mastery. So when they do get to high school, they are in a better position. You know, they should be giving themselves feedback. They're not metacognition and self-regulation, just like Anna was talking earlier. It's really important that these skills are developed from a very young age. Peer tutoring and all those. If you look at one-to-one tuition, the impact is there, but it's a high cost, high impact technique, if you like. Whereas if you look at things like a group work, they're low cost and high impact. So what this research is by the Education Endowment Fund, if you wanted to look it up. What it shows you is low cost, high impact strategies, high cost, high impact strategies, low cost, low impact strategies. And they're important for head teachers and senior leaders in schools and teachers to have a look at, to see what strategy is effective. Also, when we're talking about mastery and we're talking about differentiation, this is just an example of a low ceiling, high threshold activity. You know, are we giving students exposure to problems other than what's in their textbook? Are we giving them things like digit cards and saying, right, off you go, you've got digit cards 1 to 9 or 0 to 9, and what your job now is to work in a group and put them together and make this equation work, and let's see how you can do it. And you can only use each digit once. What it enables, I mean, if you were in a real boardroom right now, I would have asked you to do it, but obviously we can't. It does develop them to think, and it enables all pupils of any ability to work together, so that your lower ability children, which are working towards their age-related expectations, can still participate and still learn from their peers, because what you're not doing is segregating them and putting a ceiling on their learning. And if you like, do try this activity. It is good fun. And it's one of, again, if you want to look it up, it's low ceiling, high threshold activities. They're activities that are suitable for all. And you can also alternate the top end and challenge them further. Other area that Singaporeans think about in mathematics are looking at competencies and developing core competencies in learners, like metacognition, visualization, generalization, number sense and communication. So it's really important to ensure that our students develop them. How many of our students can visualize, especially when you give them a picture of a cube and perhaps put a dot on a net on a piece of paper and say, right, if I rotate that sheet of paper 180 degrees, or where will the dot be now? Until some children have to kinesthetically do it. So it is giving activities that promote visualization. So success of the education system, we know that they are performing at the top in benchmark international tests such as TIMSS and PIRLS. So there is something that they are doing that is right. These strategies have helped hundreds of students and teachers to develop skills. It's a matter of looking into it and exploring it. The approach is very simple. They do focus on fundamentals and conceptual understanding as opposed to instrumental understanding. So I'm now going to give you a quick whistle tour over the CPA approach. It is research by Jerome Bruner, constructivist theory. I'm sure there are others out there as well. And he says that learning is an active process in which learners construct knowledge. So therefore, again, this fits nicely in the low ceiling, high threshold tasks, what I just mentioned earlier, and it is making sure that knowledge can be represented as a sequence of instruction in no particular order. You do not have to move from concrete pictorial to abstract if you're working in the primary setting, but it is important to give children access to concrete. They sometimes need it before they can shift to pictorial and abstract. However, what do we tend to do? We go straight to the abstract and skip the concrete and pictorial. And again, it is a way of working. It is that pedagogy and methodology that is part of mastery learning. So the CPA represents progression. It enables students to become familiar with modes of learning. They develop fluency through the operation before we move them to symbolic ways of working. So if a student is doing subtraction and they can't subtract, and we teach them, oh, you just need to borrow, knock next door and borrow. Well, you're not borrowing, because when you're borrowing, you give it back, but you're not. So they need to learn that actually it's an exchange. Because you couldn't subtract, you're going to now exchange from the tens column. So it's, again, teachers' own subject knowledge has to be secure. So in terms of assessment, now how well are we assessing what pupils learn? How do we know what they've learned? How are we supporting struggling learners? And how do we advance learners who need extension? And how does CPA support deeper conceptual understanding? Questions. How many of you go into a classroom and perhaps give the mathematical work out and sit down and let kids get on with it? You know, are you therefore then assessing? At that point, I'm going to say, you know, what is the difference between, I'm going to skip forward, I think I'm going too far forward, is I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you have that understanding of the difference between formative assessment and summative? Are we doing too much of summative and not enough formative? And observing students learning. So Dufour's 4 key critical questions, which are Dufour, again, when you are planning, and this is a fundamental word, planning work, what do you want your cohort to learn? What are your expectations? Or do you just give activities for the sake of giving and allowing them to be completed? How do you know they're learning? What forms of assessment are you putting in place? And what do you do if they're not learning? And what is the plan for intervention? Or is it not your problem and it's a problem of the family? And how do you know that they are ready to be challenged? And how many of you are actually spending time thinking about this when you plan lessons? Again, as I go into classrooms and I do observations, I can tell how much time the teacher has spent in planning the lesson and to get maximum learning, and how many teachers, when I go in, are coasting because all they have done is open a textbook, put it in front of the kids, and are just ploughing through and thinking, right, wherever they get stuck, they'll stop. And then what you're not doing is challenging the learning. How are you differentiating within your cohort? Are you in primary putting students at a very young age into groups of top, middle, bottom? If you read Jo Bowler's work and you work on the and you read about maths and you also read her work on the elephant in the classroom, that is where we first and foremost put that fear of maths into the minds of young children. Because if we put them into the lower set and we don't mix them up, what are we doing? We're putting a ceiling on their learning already right at the start. The Elephant in the Classroom by Joe Bowler, Boaler, is a must read if you are passionate about ensuring that your mathematical pedagogy and methodology is on par, and you really want to know how much damage you can do by putting students into groups. So differentiation by task or by variation, and what is the difference? Do you have different tasks for different students, or do you put scaffold in place, which is helping a student to climb up and not hold them back? Then you have the students who are advanced. So we're just going to quickly listen to Banha, who's going to explain how do you know if a student is advanced, not just by the procedures, but do they have the cognitive understanding?
A child who is truly advanced, meaning they are able to do the computation, but not just that. In Scan's word, not just having instrumental understanding, but also relational understanding. They can do some of the 5 things. The first thing is that they can show a physical model for 8 plus 6. They can look around them and say, oh, that's an example for 8 plus 6. There are 8 boys and 6 girls in that group. How many children are there all together? They are able to do that. They can come up with a physical model. And if you ask them to draw 8 plus 6, they are able to draw something appropriate. Thirdly, they are able to explain it orally. They are also able to explain it in written form, maybe coupled with some drawings. And finally, such advanced children, they are always able to find ways to challenge themselves. So once they are done with 8 plus 6, they might think to themselves, could I find another way to do 8 plus 6? Maybe by doing doubles, maybe by subtracting from 20. So those are the 5 indicators that a child is truly advanced, having relational understanding.
So just on what he has said, I would ask, how many of us actually give students those opportunities? Or do we make an assumption that they're advanced because they've completed their work, because they knew the method? And do we question how they got to where they got to? Can they show it in another way? Can they find a different strategy? And as Banha always says, if you want to assess a mastery, if a student has mastered the concept you're teaching, it's can they do it one way? Can they do it another way? And if it's a clever day, can they do it a third way? Can they put it into a word problem? Can they illustrate it in multiple different ways? And it is working the depth of understanding as opposed to just superficial understanding. And that's why the lesson structure is very, very important. A 3-part lesson, which gives us, and I put a funnel at the top, an upside down triangle, where you're starting off the lesson with the group activity, a problem. You're not going in lecturing, you've proposed a problem, and students work in collaborative groups and they solve it, which then feeds into your guided practice, which is partnered work, which ultimately leads to independent practice. And as a teacher, your role is to facilitate that, but at the same time, ensure success. So if a student you notice in the anchor task, which is the group task, the problem task, is finding things challenging, you can modify their guided practice. Don't just give them the activity you've planned, modify that. It could also be a guided group where you identify different students and pull them out into a specific group, because what you want is when they get to the independent practice, they are successful. So you need to build in the interventions into your lesson, because it's not catch up, it's ensuring students can keep up. And there's a pedagogy in the way the lesson's structured for it to be successful and the learning to be how you want it to be. So differentiation, as I mentioned previously, by task or variation, there are lots of theories of differentiated practice. You can look up Carol Tomlinson. Because of time, I'm not going to go into depth, but there's content, there's process, there's product, and you can look at differentiation through those. There's another model where Joe Bowler talks about how the growth mindset, that the power of yet, and I am not there yet, that doesn't matter, but I need to have recreational maths. Maybe they need different activities, they need more thinking time, and that's absolutely fine. And she is the one that's written The Elephant in the Classroom, a highly recommended book if you're into innovative teaching in mathematics. The gentleman, Banha, talked about teacher assessment, showing students in different ways. And also formative assessment. Are you observing the learning, and are you picking up where your learners are and knowing when to intervene? So it's really important to think about the most effective form of assessment and how powerful formative is, more so than summative. And finally, my final point is journaling. And what is journaling in maths? Have you ever used journaling in maths? And actually, you know, if we think of maths as a language, we need to be able to speak it, read it, and write it. And in maths, journaling is an opportunity for children to write maths, okay? So they can journal by writing their explanations. How many times do you ask your student, right, how did you do that? I just know it's in my head. What you're doing is developing their critical thinking. You're raising their cognitive bar to think critically and explain. And that in itself will develop mastery. These are some examples of some students who have explained their thinking. So they've done the task, but as you can see, they've been honest and reflective. It was hardest when I was dividing, you know, and that's what you want the student to do. Here, my step one is adding. So the student is going through their steps, and you can pick up where the misconceptions are when you journal. Again, it enhances critical thinking. So I'm not going to go through the lesson structure. So my last slide is struggle is good, I want to fly. So a story I'm going to leave you to read for a couple of seconds. It's about a caterpillar and a child. And just to summarize now, and I didn't want to sort of judge anyone's intelligence and read it to you, but the story was about looking at helping break out of a shell, helping a caterpillar break out of a cocoon. And the child was desperate to help, but had to be patient and allow it to break out itself. And that is what we are as instructors are supposed to do. Struggle, he learned that a butterfly was supposed to struggle. In fact, the butterfly struggled to push its way out through the tiny opening of the cocoon, pushes the fluid out of the body and into the wings. And without the struggle, the butterfly would never fly. So the boy's good intentions actually hurt the butterfly. So as you go through school and life, keep in mind that struggling is an important part of any growth experience. In fact, it's a struggle that causes you to helps you to develop your ability to fly. So my message to you is, as instructors, our gift to our students is to give them those opportunities to struggle to help them fly. So question today, through my quick reviews, I've not done justice to maths mastery and the Singapore way, but what I've been able to do is take you through some of the fundamentals in the 30 minutes I had, with 2 minutes to spare. So what I will say is, what are the key principles that you're taking away today? Because I think for me, if you put that in the chat box, that would be really helpful. And if there's anything else that you would like to know, that is fine too. So I'm going to say thank you very much. I hope that gave you some exposure to the maths mastery in the Singapore approach or manner. So I'm going to stop my share. And that was not enough time, I'm going to say to Ralphia, for me to do what I had to do. But I think in the 30 minutes, I was able to cover significant amount at speed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, very much, Shazia. I think you have made some very valid points, and I think this is ये मतलब एक दुखती रग है हमारी maths teaching, where we find many teachers struggling to reach out to the students, and as well as students and parents saying that they wanted a better maths were not understood, so children face difficulty on mathematics teaching, and to elaborate on the Singapore way.